Hi, everyone. My name is Shania Siron. I'm one of the Career and Fellowship Advisors for the Center for Life Beyond Read. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about the Watson and the process, and hopefully give you some insight into what to expect.
Hi, my name is Alisa Chen. I use they, them pronouns. I'm a senior anthropology major, Chinese minor, class of 21. And I'm this year's one of Reed's Watson Fellows. So I'm the 71st Reed Watson Fellow. My project is about ice hockey and institutional power in the ways that privilege, gender, and race interact to support various communities and like who can be on the ice. So I'll be traveling to Canada, Sweden, Iceland, oops, Hong Kong, and India. And I'm really excited.
Awesome. We're excited to have you. And by we, I guess I just mean me because it's just me. Okay, so we have a host of questions, and I'm going to MC, and I'm just going to batter you with these questions. It's going to be very
Sweet.
intimidating.
I took some notes.
Okay, cool. So we'll start off with the first question. So off the top of your head, can you kind of remember on average how many hours per week you committed to working on your application, both from like the beginning and the conception of the application during the internal application process all the way through to finally submitting the app after the
Definitely.
external process?
Mhm. So I was thinking about this question like an hour ago, and I actually don't remember how much I worked on it. I remember in the middle of the summer before my senior year, so last summer, I started thinking about like what applications I would have to do and like if I wanted to take like the LSAT or the GRE or anything. So I was trying to prepare myself in terms of like what that workload would look like in addition to just like taking classes and working part-time. So I would say over the summer, especially towards the end of it, I would think about my project a lot and what I wanted it to look like, what countries I would go to, what resources I would have, like what skills I would bring that would help with my project, what I needed to figure out before like actually being able to start writing about it. Towards like the very end of the summer, I started meeting with you and like other CLBR staff, and I started writing my. So I would say from there, I started working on it like maybe an hour or so a week. I tried to work on it really consistently because like the more I thought about it, the more ideas that came to mind. And I was like trying to get in contact with folks as well to create like my list of contacts in the countries I wanted to go to. So being able to both do that, work on my contacts list and work on my essays at the same time was really important. I would say towards the end, both for the internal deadline and for like the Watson Fellowship, like deadline after I had been selected as an internal nominee, I was probably looking at my application like for 30 minutes a day and actually working on it like a couple of hours a week. I just wanted to make sure that I felt like well represented in my writing and that my project was like what I actually wanted it to be on paper. So yeah, I think that I thought about it a lot at the beginning, and then towards the deadlines, I started writing more and just like proofreading and stuff.
Yeah. And what I'm hearing too from what how you describe it is just the consistency of, starting early, and even if you set the goal of just consistently taking time to think about it, and then setting your next goal of consistently taking time to like just jot down notes and ideas until you get to a point where you have a like more of a cohesive idea that you can put down on paper, and then you start consistently drafting out where you go and what you would do. And it just seems like it's a matter of regularly returning back to your application, not putting it off until the deadline, not putting off
Yes.
meeting with advisors until the deadline.
Yeah, definitely. Uh, yeah, that's something I had done previously where I would just like think like, oh, I have like all the thoughts in my head to write this application for this like huge fellowship. So I'll just wait until the week beforehand and write it. And that has not gone very well. Um, like even if I've been awarded the fellowship, it's been like a very stressful process. And I didn't want that to be the case with this when it was like something so personal to me and my lived experiences. Something I also want to note is I met with CLBR advisors, so Shania, but I also went to the drop-in sessions before the internal deadline, and I found that to be super helpful because I met with an advisor who had never seen, I met with Julia, and she had never seen my application before, and like having that fresh set of eyes on it, like brought up a lot of questions and comments that I wasn't really expecting as someone who had like looked at my application for months, and that was really I think, helpful for my first interview, especially.
Yeah. And actually with that, let's go ahead. I feel like that I put a question in here that's very
Yes.
similar of like,
Yeah.
um, where is it? Yeah, like
The third
what,
one.
oh, who all did you work with, talk to, get feedback from when you were drafting your application?
Yeah. So I talked to all three of the career advisors. So Shania, Hayden, and Julia. I also talked to last year's Watson fellows from Reed. So I talked to Gio and Stephanie, both just like briefly on the phone to ask like what their experience was and like what recommendations they had, especially as people who had like been awarded the fellowship. I talked to my mom a lot about it actually, because for me, this project is about like, um, it's like a coming of age story of sorts, I guess. And being able to bounce ideas off of her was really helpful. So I would recommend like using CLBR resources. I talked to my advisor about it a little bit because he had previously been on the Watson internal committee. And that was super helpful because he like knew what you all were looking for and was like very honest with me about it. Um, yeah, so I just like looked for people I really trusted and who like knew what I wanted to do, and like knew where I was coming from with those experiences. Um, yeah.
Yeah. And I feel like those different levels of feedback are super valuable. I think that's a big, I mean, in general, the Watson is, it's such a huge project that it's important that you get comfortable talking about it too. Cause you're getting, you're getting feedback from other people about your application, but then you're also having to get comfortable like presenting
Yeah.
what you're doing and why you want to do it, which I think is just valuable when it comes time to have to interview for the award.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I also just like talked to friends about it casually because a lot of my senior friends were like applying for Fulbright or other like bigger fellowships, and being able to just like talk through ideas or just like casually bring up what we're working on was really helpful just because like they were going through similar processes. Um, and it was nice to feel like it's like really easy during the application to feel like really overwhelmed because it is like usually a really personal project. Um, and it was for me, but like talking to other people in similar boats was just like really calming and nice.
Yeah, I love that. I feel like having that community, especially when you get to your senior year, because
Yeah.
so many of the big name fellowships are available senior year. And so I feel like everyone is kind of going through this process of having to thesis on top of like competing for these
Yeah.
massive awards on top of grad school. So it is nice to kind of build that community around yourself. All right. Well, next question. What was your process for coming up with your project idea? Did you
Yeah.
have like a million ideas that you were thinking of, or did you just kind of already know this is what I was going to do?
Yeah, I like this question a lot because, like I said, over the summer, so last summer, I was thinking a lot about like what I wanted my project to look like. And I knew I was going to apply, but I wasn't super sure as to what would be a project that one, I felt like I could really do for an entire year and enjoy the entire time, even when it was difficult. And two, I was a Winter International Travel Fellow back in 2019, right? Yeah. And from that experience, I knew that I needed to choose a project where I felt I brought a certain skill set to that like I could work on my own, even if like my contacts fell through or like the situations changed in like whatever places I was planning to be or whatever organizations I wanted to work with. So I wrote down notes. Um, One of the first things I tried to do was like brainstorm like my various values and interests that I wanted to explore. Um, I tried to think of like not just my academic interests, but the interests that were really personal to me, and especially the ones that I hadn't been able to really engage with at Reed. Because even though like the Reed education is like fairly holistic, like I couldn't play hockey here. That was like a huge trade-off for me in coming to Portland for school. Um, I wanted to do something where I felt like even in those early stages, I knew what I wanted to learn and what I could do if things were going. So yeah, mostly I was thinking about like what would be interesting to me, like very seriously, even beyond just like what would sound good, right? Like, because there are like always those ideas that are like, oh, this sounds like super cool, and like, oh, the Watson Foundation is going to love this, but like you have to actually have like a lot of interest in it. Um, so hockey was like a pretty easy choice for me, just because I thought a lot about like what I felt I had lost at Reed, but also in the pandemic. And for me, that was like the opportunity to be in community through sports. And um, like inequalities in the sport were something that I thought a lot about in high school, as like my opportunities to like play at the level of competition I wanted to became like fewer and fewer. Uh, so yeah, I think it's just really important to think separately about personal interests and academic interests, because I think that like the further along in the process you go, the harder it could be. Like this wasn't, I didn't, my project isn't like an academic interest necessarily, beyond just like privilege and gender and race. But I think that like the Watson is a really exciting opportunity to think outside of what you are doing academically already. And if your personal and academic interests align, like that's really awesome. But like your thesis doesn't have to be the same as your Watson project, for example.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, like you hit on some really important notes there. Just like the necessary scaffolding that kind of goes into competing for these huge awards. You have applied to Winter International and won it among other funds. And so you have, you know, you've developed that skill for um, persuading people to give you money. And
Yes.
that's how I like to refer to it.
I like that.
You know, and that it's such a different skill than writing your thesis and working at that academic level. You know, you have to learn how to write about yourself um, in relation to the purpose of that fund, which is the other part of what I was going to say, of like really understanding like why the Watson exists and what makes for a Watson-y project is really important. Because to your point, there are lots of interesting ideas. But does that idea align with who you are? And does that idea align with the Watson? And then can you persuade the Watson and convince them that you are aligned as a person with them? And it's like this triangle or like Venn diagram of like, you know, you have to lie at the intersection of your project, who you are, and the Watson. And developing that skill it takes time, and it means applying to other awards and maybe getting rejected or maybe getting funded, getting feedback, working with an advisor. And you really touched on that. And it sounds like you were kind of intrinsically doing it when you were developing your project.
Yeah. For like one of your next questions, the one about what skills I felt helped make me a stronger and later successful applicant, I was actually thinking about, let's just jump to that. I was thinking about something, I can't remember if it was Gio or Stephanie or even my advisor Anand who said it. But someone along the way reminded me that it's really important to look at like the Watsons like key values and try to see how my project like exemplifies them and really embodies them, to show the foundation that I'm not only someone who's bringing like an interesting project to the table, but also someone who embodies like those core values for them, like as a representative of their foundation and someone they're giving a lot of money to. So like after I came up with this like idea of like, I want to play ice hockey around the world with like non-white men, like people who aren't white and who aren't men. I was like, great, that'll be really fun for me. I can definitely do that for a year. And I think I would have a blast. But like, what's in it for the Watson and how do I tie all those things together? And that part was like a little more difficult, but I feel like a lot of like the things I value about myself were also like in that list of traits that like the Watson Foundation was looking for. So really just like highlighting those things similarly to how you would in like a cover letter almost, I think is something that really helped me.
Yeah, I feel like so much of what you're saying reminds me of the things we advise students when going through the job process of like, you know, looking, you know, that mission statement or those, you know, those statements of purpose on the website are not arbitrary. You know, there is a reason they exist. And if you take the time to review them and understand the mission of the foundation and why they want to give somebody $36,000, like they're, you know, to want to give a student that much money that doesn't have to do with grad school. Like there's a very specific reason for that. They have reasons to want to invest in you, and those are definitely outlined in the website. And taking that time to kind of craft your purpose and narrative around their purpose and narrative is really important. Just like we would recommend somebody do, go research the company's website, figure out who they are, and draft your cover letter around them. It is an important task, and it really does, it shines through in the application. Like I think the committee could probably agree that we can tell if a student understands the purpose of the fund or not. Even if it's a great project, we can tell, and the Watson can tell, if you took the time to understand the reason for their fund.
Yeah, definitely.
All right, let's see. I'm kind of popping around a little bit. Okay, this is a fun one. What were some of the greatest challenges of competing for this award? And examples I put were like maybe time management, interviewing, conceptualizing the project, etc.
Yeah, for me, it was definitely just that it felt really intimidating. I know a lot of us like experience imposter syndrome, but for me, this was something that was like so personal and so unlike any application I had done before, where I felt that really deeply, especially as someone who really hasn't played hockey in like 3 years, besides like the occasional drop-in game. And so I think for me, it was really something that was really challenging for me, right? Like I wasn't sure, one, if this was like a compelling project. I was like, I think it's really interesting. It's like me, like this Chinese American non-binary person being like, I want to go play hockey around the world. But also I wanted to feel like really confident when talking about my project, which was a little scary because I was like, but is this like something that's worth like the fellowship and like the money and the support that comes with it? And so for me, like overcoming that was really just being like, just reminding myself that like the skills that come with the sport are not really things that I could forget. Like it was just such a big part of like who I was like growing up, that every time I had those thoughts, I was like, that's really silly because I think that like 20 years from now, I could still play hockey and be pretty good at it. Not to be cocky. And also another thing that helped a lot was after the internal interview and becoming an internal nominee, I met with some of the people who were on the committee and who interviewed me, and asked them questions based on the feedback they gave me. And so like being able to work with them in those like one-on-one situations, just like dropping into office hours, emailing and asking questions was really helpful because it also helped me make my project like take fuller shape. I don't know if that makes sense, but just like bouncing ideas off of these people who had like interviewed a lot of students for the same fellowship, was just like so helpful, and it really validated like my process and my project and like my faith in the project too. So yeah, when it like came time for my like Watson Foundation interview, I felt like pretty confident, both in like myself as a candidate as well as my project as an applicant, and that felt really good.
Do you remember any of the questions from that interview?
I remember. Oh, Shania, I have notes somewhere. I don't know if I remember. I remember getting asked like what I would do if someone didn't want to play hockey with me. Like um one of the like contacts on my list of contacts was the women's national team in India. And someone asked like what would you do if like they just like why would they want to play hockey with you? Like what's the point? And I remember I had to like think a little on my feet in that moment because I was like, I don't know, I would just play hockey elsewhere. But yeah, I remember that question. I remember in both interviews just being asked a lot of questions that like fleshed out my project. Like what would the day-to-day look like? So like you have these contacts, you're doing these things, but like what are you doing at like 8 a.m. you're in a new place? I remember being asked like what would you do if something went wrong, like a contact that you were really relying on just like stopped responding, or you like got to a new place and it was just like totally different from what you expected. Yeah, those are some of the questions. I'm sure there's like a better list somewhere, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, but those questions, like being able to, I think for a junior, rising senior, knowing that like, you know, those questions are being asked for a reason. There's so much that's going to go into that year that there's no way you can predict everything, right? Like, but in your writing, if you can speak to, you know, your preparedness by having a ton of contacts if possible, by having like safety nets in place, and by thinking about like what would just a random Tuesday look like for you, and like what are you going to do during some of the more of the quiet periods of your project to still be productive. You know, those are important things to consider, because I think what I see is when students are drafting their application, they're thinking of the really big, exciting moments. And then you have to consider all of like the 360 other days of the year, right?
Yeah.
And those, yeah, having something prepared to speak to what happens if something goes wrong or you lose a contact. What are you going to do when you have nothing on your calendar for that day? Those are important questions, and could definitely like make or break your candidacy if you haven't thought about it.
Yeah.
Let's see. Oh, I have my last question. So what
Nice.
advice would you give? What advice would you give a junior who may be considering the award for next year?
Definitely. I wrote notes. I would say to go for it. I think like with these types of fellowships, there's a lot of like, oh, this is like super interesting, but it sounds like a lot of work and like I don't know if I could do it. And it's like, okay, like you get like one shot to apply for it. And if you think like if you automatically like have an idea or you feel like, you know, this is something that really suits your personality or like something you're interested in, you literally only have one shot. So like I think you should just go for it. Also, I think that it was really important for me to think really hard about again my personal interests and not just my academic ones, but also how they intersected so that um, I guess so that my project would have like meaning in a lot of ways. Um, and I think I did that pretty well, which is really exciting for me. I would say definitely meet with CLBR folks. Shania is a great resource. Um, and again, like talking to your friends and like people you trust about your project is super helpful because the interviews are literally just like, tell me about your project. They're like very conversational and you just have to know a lot about it. So even if in your head, like everything makes sense, being able to vocalize that in ways that are like compelling and clear and concise is really important. Um, yeah, those are the things I would recommend doing. Also talk to past fellows. I think that I learned a lot and felt much more confident after talking to Gio and Stephanie, just because it was like people that I had known during their times at Reed who were like, yeah, you'd be a great candidate, like go for it, good luck. And that was just a very sweet like connection to have with them.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah, of course.
I love talking Watson. We could probably go on forever, but I'm sure everyone watching would like to wrap it up. So I'm going to go ahead
Yeah.
and stop the recording.